We've all heard of, participated in, sent our kids off to preschool or elementary school to show and tell. We have memories of show and tell, how we get to take that prized possession and explain all about it. First you show, then you tell. And it's amazing how much of our lives actually functions that way all the time. In fact, to get started, I want you to use your imagination. For those of you who have been desert dwellers for your whole life, this is going to take some major brain power. For those of you who've ever lived somewhere where things grow naturally, then this will come easier. And so I grew up in the Midwest, so I want you to imagine a farm, okay? A farm just means a house with some outbuildings and fields all around it. So every direction you look, it's green. I grew up in a place called Illinois where things grow on accident and water falls from the sky. And in the middle of the summer, it doesn't only fall from the sky, it like lingers all the time in what this thing we call humidity. And it's not like when it's like 15% around here and people are like, oh, it's so humid today. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking like 90% humidity where it's basically raining everywhere all the time. And you just walk outside and you're immediately wet. And so I want you to imagine a small little white farmhouse sitting in the middle of wide open fields full of beans and corn. I know it's so hard for some of you, but just imagine. And there's this older man who is sitting there with his wife. They've probably been married 30, 35, 40 years. And he's getting ready to go back to work. He's got these things called overalls on, which are like jeans attached to a jean thing on the top. And like a seed corn hat. And so he's just finished a phenomenal glass of iced tea because that's how much his wife loves him. This has been their tradition for years and years and years. He's taking a break. And he sets off back across the yard toward the outbuildings, and in tow is his 3, 4, maybe 5-year-old granddaughter, maybe in a sundress, and they're just walking kind of through the breeze, heading across, and she's just following Grandpa right along. Now, Grandpa has this habit of chewing tobacco, right? Something he developed a long, long time ago, and so it's just his habit, just kind of his afternoon routine. And so he puts some tobacco in, and he starts walking, and every, 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds, he just looks over the side and just spits. He's got to get rid of that stuff. And so he walks out and he takes his little daughter and shows all about it. She gets to walk around and hang out on the farm, just love being with Grandpa. Goes out to the outbuilding, sees all the different things he needs to work on and do, sees big piles, bags of seed corn and that kind of stuff. He spits, and then he walks out and they walk out of the barn and they go out and he checks out the fields and shows how he checks on those and talks about the best time for rain, spits, right? And every little while he's doing this thing and he's showing her around and she's just loving being with Grandpa. Well, sure enough, as Grandma comes back out on the porch and sees Grandpa and granddaughter, 3 or 4-year-old granddaughter, every 10 or 12 steps, Grandpa spits. And sure enough, what does Grandma see granddaughter doing every 10 or 12 steps? Right? He didn't have to tell her. She's just constantly watching. It's amazing to me how much, people have said this for years, but more is caught than is taught. Right? That people are actually deeply influenced by who we are and what we say, or who we are and what we do, way more than what we say. Right? How many times, for those of you who are parents, you get this, and those of you who are kids, you get it just from a different angle. But parents, how many times, have you looked at your kid and you're just like, I don't know why you're that way. I'll look at this super intense child of mine. He is awesome. He is passionate. He gets fired up fast. And I look at him, and then I look at my wife. I'm like, how did he turn out like this? And she's like, really? Think about it, Drew, just for a second, you'll put it together, right? It would be great. It would be great if as parents in particular, but for any of us who are influencing those younger than us, it would be great if we could just impart the wisdom that we have. We just tell them and they do what we say, right? In fact, almost every parent, every adult ever has said this: do what I say, not what I do. Right? That's what we kind of said is listen, just do this. And sometimes even as parents, we find ourselves saying things like, oh, that is so great. I should try that, But we're telling them one thing, but we don't always do that. When in reality, what happens, just like with this 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old little girl, what kids actually are doing, they're processing. It's not conscious, it's subconscious. But what they're really going to do is they're like, listen, I'll do what I see. Maybe I'll do what you say. Right? We're always, and we do this with people all the time, right? With politicians, they can say anything they want. And what do we say? We'll wait and see. A new boss steps into our work, says to me, a new climate, new culture, new expectations. This is what it's going to be like. And you listen and you take it in, but then you weigh it against what's actually going to happen. Right? Because there's this thing that we all know is true, particularly those of us who are parents and all of you who are kids. We know this, that who we are and what we do speaks so much louder than what we say. That people are mostly influenced. People will be more influenced by who we are and what we do than by what we say. which in one sense can be a little bit scary because I know me. I don't know if you know you, but I know me. And there are things about me that I think God has put in me, and I think they're great. They came from my parents. They came from other influencers, and I want those to pass on to my kids. But there are also those things in my life I'm like, well, I hope you don't get stuck with that, right? I hope that doesn't, right? So in some sense, it's scary. But on the other sense, it's this brilliant opportunity for every single one of us that we have the opportunity, even if we don't always know how to explain it, if we can live these things in front of the people that we influence, then that's actually what they're going to catch, even if we don't know exactly how to say it right. That who we are and what we do actually influences people more than what we say. We show, we live it in front of them, and then we provide context by telling them. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to lean into this and talk about show and tell. In fact, Paul would say this. We're going to look at this through the lens of a guy in the scriptures. He wrote back to a group of believers in this town called Thessalonica. I think what he has said is this, that when it comes to influence, the best way forward is to both show and tell. That we demonstrate it with our lives, and then we tell people to help understand why that came about. That we could live this way. And if we're going to have influence on people around us, in fact, for the next 4 weeks, we're really going to talk mostly about parents and kids, because a huge portion of our church, we are parents. We're grandparents. We have either grown kids, young kids, or all ages of kids, but a lot of us are parents. And I'm pretty sure 100% of us are somebody's kids. And so everybody finds their way into this thing one way or another. Even if you're not a parent, even if you have no intention of becoming a parent, or that hasn't been a possibility, there are still young eyes always watching you that you get to influence. And the main way you're going to influence is by the things that you show, not just by the things that you tell. And so I want to show this to you from this guy named Paul. This is exactly how he lived, and we're going to use him as an example this weekend. In the book of 1 Thessalonians, just a letter, Paul showed up in this place and started telling people all about Jesus, and they started to orient their lives around Jesus. They actually believed that Jesus paid this huge price for them, that they could be connected with God, and they were convinced that it would change everything about their lives, which is what we are here at Canyon Ridge. We're a bunch of people looking at what Jesus has said and living into that as best we can and finding out that life fills up as we do that. And so these were the same kind of people. This guy Paul rolls in and tells them all about Jesus. He's only there for 3 weeks, but while he was there, he demonstrated who they could become. He was an example of who they would become. He showed, and then later he would write this letter and tell. In fact, just a couple quick examples. In 1 Thessalonians 1:5, it says this. Paul says, "And you know of our concern for you from the way we lived when we were with you." In other words, they lived so closely alongside them. Look, we don't have to tell you that we loved you. We showed you, and we demonstrated how you could live. In 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 8, it says, "We loved you so much that we shared with you not only God's good news," this whole message of Jesus bringing all of us back to God, that anybody can be connected to God, he says, but he also shared our own lives too, that he lived alongside them. So there's this principle that we're going to build the next 4 weeks on, that the best way to influence is by showing and telling, and probably always in that order. That the things that we do and who we are the most influential things about us. And we're going to do that in a particular way. We're going to build this thing around something that captures all of our hearts and influences every single part of all of our lives. It's everyone's favorite thing to talk about in church. Money, right? You've been waiting for it. You're excited, I can tell, right? Someone's like, I got plans next week. But here's the thing, that money is just money. But how we think about money and how we interact with money is deeply spiritual. That the way we deal with it, how much we trust it, how much we're afraid of it, how much it stresses us out, how much of our thought life it takes up, how we consume things and what we expect about those things, all of those things are spiritual issues. Every single one of them. Even if your pay goes from here to here and we find a way to live here, now we've got this other spiritual challenge of how do we be content with that? How do we live in a content way and with peace? This has a huge part of our hearts. And so we're going to demonstrate 2 things all at once for this whole series. We're going to talk about this principle of we influence people by what we do. And at the same time, we're going to talk about money, because it's an example of one thing that has a way of capturing our hearts. And truthfully, it's going to be something that influences the rest of our kids' lives. Now, the reason we're talking about this whole parent and kid thing is some of you have already done it. Some of you are like, you're in your phone immediately, because as soon as I said money in church, you're just out. You're just done. Because as soon as we start to go at some things in our lives, as soon as we start to talk about the real things of our lives, we all have this tendency, every single one of us, to put up this wall and we start rationalizing things. We start defending things. We start making suspicions about the people that are talking to us. Because the truth is, we all have beliefs about money. We all have habits about money. We all have desires with it. We all have things that we know we probably should do differently, but we don't really want to. We don't really want to get into that. Don't open that door. I don't want to deal with that. And so we all set up this wall of defense. But I just want to warn you, anytime if you really want Jesus to have your whole life, those are the very places you should attack the most often. As soon as you find yourself being defensive, my guess is that just on the other side is some of God's best work for you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a side door. Instead of coming right at the door, right at the thing, we're going to talk about it this way. Instead of saying, hey, here's what you should do with your money, or here's what God says we should do with our money, we're going to take a side door and say, hey, what do you want your kids to do with money? Because how good are we at thinking well for other people? You know what I'm saying? We're really good at that, especially for people we love, like our kids. But we don't always trace that back to our lives. So here's what we're going to do. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to think about how do we help the next generation think really well about money. But here's the truth. We can think all day about that, but if we don't take a step back and actually begin to live that way, it's probably not going to make much difference because they're watching way more than they're listening. And so we're just going to take this side door. We're just going to go right around that wall everybody tries to put up, and we're just going to, side door, sneak attack, and go at it, okay? So here's the question. Let's just start at it. Ready? I would like for you to take 30 awkward seconds of silence, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to write 5 words or phrases that you hope describe your kid's future relationship with money. Now, I'll say this for the last time. Not everybody here is a parent. Not everybody here has kids, but everybody has people that they influence, and everybody is a kid who even has the potential to influence their parents. Every single one of us can think well about this. We're always going to talk about parents and kids for now because that's a lot of us. But write 5 words or phrases that you hope describe the relationship that your kids, grandkids, whoever have with money as they progress in life, okay? You got 30 seconds. It's going to be super awkward, very quiet. Go ahead. All right, I can't take it. It's too awkward. There's only about 20 seconds. I don't know how far you got, but here's the thing. What we hope to do every single weekend is set up conversations with you and God, because we're not here to tell everyone. We're here to set up conversations, because really you and God got to figure out what you're going to do with your life and the influence that you've been afforded with people around you. You've got to figure that out. It is worth time to sit down and think, what do I really hope people around me, my kids in particular, learn about how to deal with money? Now, I'm pretty sure I know what some of you wrote. Some of you wrote down, as I think about my relationship with my kids, I hope that as they grow up, we have a chance every single week to talk on the phone and they ask me for money. And I hope that someday I get to share in the experience of help talking my kid through what a maxed out credit card looks like. I hope that I dream for my kids that the day they retire, they're able to make their last payment to pay off their college tuition. I hope that when they graduate from that expensive college, that they find the best path back to my spare bedroom and don't contribute to groceries. Here's the question that God kind of smacked me upside the head with just a little bit, okay? It's easy for me to think about what I hope for my kids. But then I have to ask the question, is that the relationship that I have with money? Is that what they're watching? The way I asked it to myself earlier this week was this: would the things my kids say about what I think about money match what I hope they believe about money? Because what my kids are really going to learn is what I'm doing, not just what I'm saying. And so I've got to live into the things that I dream for them. I've actually got to become that, because they're going to become who I am and what I do, not just what I say. And so that's the side door we're going to try to take for the rest of this thing. It's easy for us to dream for others, but let's just actually start to live into that. And we're going to do it kind of 2 things at the same time. You ready? For our next little bit, we're going to finish this up by talking about show and tell. And we're going to start for the next 4 weeks laying out a full picture of money. This week, we're going to dive right in on where money comes from. And no, I don't mean magic little plastic cards or the envelope in the other room. What I mean is work. We're going to deal with work because every generation needs to know that work is where money comes from. Somebody's work is where money comes from. Next week, we'll talk about giving. Because I don't think any of us hope that our kids grow up and say, man, I hope my kids really give sparingly. I hope they're about themselves and never help others out. We don't think like that. No, next week we're going to talk about what it means to give generously because it's not just for us. The following week we're going to talk about saving, right? And everybody's like, yep, that's the week I'm going to miss, right? But here's the thing, is that we don't want to just save intermittently. We don't want to save randomly. We want to save sparingly. We want to save consistently because tomorrow matters. Right? Tomorrow matters. And so we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. And then in the final week, we'll talk about spending because that's part of money. We've got to figure out how to do that well. We don't want to spend flippantly. We don't want to spend impulsively. We want to spend wisely, right? Because here's this crazy thought about money. You can only spend it once. I mean, you can spend it twice with plastic, but then you'll pay for it 4 times, right? It's not how we want them to live. That's not the way we want to function. Right? And so we're going to talk about it. How do we really train our kids into this? And then on the backside of that, hopefully it's actually, every single one of us takes a look at this and says, I'm going to have to live that if that's actually the influence I want to have on people around us. And so we're going to start with work. And so I want to show you, Paul has written to this same group of people in Thessalonica. It's a town in Greece, it's still there. This group of believers, he'd only been there 3 weeks, and he writes them a couple of letters. We call one 1 Thessalonians, the other 2 Thessalonians. And they had this issue of people who had decided not to work. Right? Which is everybody, I'm sure that's what you wrote down too for your kids. Your dream for your kids is that they never actually find a job that fulfills them, right? That's probably not on anybody's list. Work is part of life, and it's a beautiful part of life. And I think if we're really going to influence our kids, then what we think about work and how we speak about work and how we treat work in our homes is fundamentally important. Before we can talk about all the other stuff, we have to start there. So let me just show you what Paul says to these believers about work. In 2 Thessalonians 3, it says this, and now, dear brothers and sisters, we give you this command in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Stay away from all believers who live idle lives. Idle, like when your engine is idling and you're not moving anywhere. You're not doing anything, right? Not idle like the thing you worship. Idle like not moving. They live idle lives and they don't follow the tradition they received from us. For you know that you ought to imitate us, Paul says. We were not idle when we were with you. We never accepted food from anyone without paying for it. We worked hard day and night so we would not be a burden to any of you. We certainly had the right to ask you to feed us, but we wanted to give you an example to follow. That's a key phrase, an example to follow. Even while we were with you, we gave you this command. Those unwilling to work will not get to eat. Verse 11, yet we hear that some of you are living idle lives, refusing to work and meddling in other people's business. He went right at it. He's like, look, I want you to think well about work, right? And so we want to show this really well. We want to show our children, we want to show people around us, we want to live in such a way that work is an amazing opportunity. And we're going to talk about this in 3 different ways. But first, I just want to show you some of the words that he said. We want to show it with an example to follow. We want to give our kids an example to follow. 2 rich words that Paul uses. This word example is literally tupos. It means type. Like if you're going to cast something, like you create a cast and you fill it and it becomes an exact copy. Or when a typewriter, the old school typewriters, like, you know what I'm saying? Like way back in the day, like people, you have them vintage on your shelves, but people actually use these for a while. And like it would make an imprint on the paper. That's the thing. He says, we want to make an imprint. We want to give you an example. Or better yet, think about it this way. When kids are learning to write, we give them dotted letters, right? You can almost make out the letter and they're just supposed to connect the dots or the dashes, yeah? That's an example that they get to follow to learn how to write their letters. And follow literally means mimic, do the exact same thing. So Paul says we showed up and we didn't just tell you what to do, we showed you. We gave you something to trace. We gave you something to follow along exactly. And so look what he says about work. Because this is so important how we think about this, because this is what's really going to influence our kids about this. The first thing Paul says is this, that contributing is the norm. Contributing is the norm. This word idle that we talked about. Idle literally means to walk, which is a metaphor for life, to move in our life, but it means to walk unusually or to walk out of line or out of rank. Imagine just for a minute a military parade where there are people in full dress uniform marching in perfect unison, sharp lines, steps at exactly the same time. It sounds like one huge foot is hitting the ground over and over and over. And then right in the middle, there's this person just kind of strolling along, doing whatever. That's a picture of the word idle. He says, people who don't work are out of step. People who don't contribute. I don't mean have a vocation. I don't mean a paid employment. I just mean people who don't contribute. He's saying that contribution is the norm because work has meaning. In fact, from the very beginning of the scriptures, when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, he gave them a job. He gave them everything they needed, gave them each other, gave them himself, gave them food and everything they needed, and then he said, go and tend and care for the garden. We were created to be contributors, not just consumers. There is value in this. It's part of how we were wired. It's the way God put us together. We love free stuff, but what free really means is that somebody else worked and paid the price for that, right? And so here's the thing. We're all called to be contributors. And so let me just encourage you to think about, have a conversation with this God and think about this, reflect on this. What role does work play in your family? As people watch your life, what are they hearing about work? Is it something that you're just supposed to begrudgingly get through so you can get to the rest of your life? Is it something that defines your identity? It's almost become an idol. Is work only a means to money so that you can have some self-worth from possession? What are people learning? If I showed up and just asked your children, whatever age they are, and just said, hey, what is work like in your family? They're like, oh, that's a 4-letter word, right? Think about it. What role does what do you really want your family to believe? If we are created to be contributors, then the way we deal with this really, really matters. I think another thing Paul says is this, is that every single person in a family has something to offer. Every single person in a family has something to offer. If contribution is the norm, then we need to look at every single person and say, what do you bring to contribute to this family? Now, he does this in a roundabout way. The church in Thessalonica, and church is just a group of people trying to follow Jesus. Don't think building and all this other stuff. Just think people who want to live well together with Jesus. They were trying to live like a family. In fact, in Thessalonica, money wasn't even a big thing. It was there, but they would share all their resources. They would kind of live communally. Their whole church would act as a family. And so we can take what he said about the church and we can trace it right back to our literal families. And what he says in verse 10 is he says, I gave this command when I was with you. If you're not going to work, you're not going to eat. In other words, everybody brings something, right? How frustrating is it when you're put in a group at work and there's that one person? You know that one person? That one person who knows the job's going to get done because everybody else is going to get it done and they freeload their way through it. How do we feel about that person, right? That's not awesome. We don't want to be a part of that noise, that they're idle, they're not contributing. Every single person has something to offer and to make things better. Same is true at work. You ever been in a job where no one asked you to do anything meaningful and you had to go to work day after day wondering if what you were doing made any difference to anything at all? That's so frustrating because we have something to offer. Work is one of the ways, whether it's contributing in our home or contributing in our workplace, we have something to bring. In fact, particularly in the church. It's why we're constantly inviting everyone to find a place to serve in our church. Because the truth is, in this group of people, every single one of us has something to offer. And you only need to ask some of those people wearing Canyon Ridge Kids shirt, or the people who are hanging out in the back, like helping people in, or the people who pass stuff, how meaningful it is to have something to contribute and something to offer, especially as it lines up with who they are. That every single one of you, whether it's your first week or not, there is something you can bring to this group of people that no one else can bring. And so we step into that and we find meaning in that. Just like my son who bought a fish for his birthday. I'm like, awesome, your room's gonna smell. And so his job is to clean the fish tank. And you have to tell him 4 or 5 times because he's a kid and he's learning work and all that kind of stuff. Sure enough, when he actually gets to the job, he's like almost scrubs a hole in the side of the tank because he cleaned it for like 45 minutes. And he just like, man, it feels good to have this clean. He looks back and he looks at a job well done. He's like, yeah, that's it. Contributes, right? And especially if it's true at work and if it's true at the church, certainly it's true in our families. And the more we can line up our contribution with who we really are, the better it is, yeah? Like the more we can say, here's who I am in particular, and I can bring that. Like my daughter who's hanging out with the 2-year-olds right now because she's a great big sister. Or my son who loves to flip buttons and he's hanging out with the tech booth at the next service. Or better yet, in my own house where one of my kids, he loves people. We were gonna have house guests this weekend and they weren't gonna arrive till the next day. He comes down an hour after bedtime asking if they're here yet. Like, they're not even supposed to arrive till the next day. He just doesn't wanna miss it because this kid is a life bringer. He just lights up around people. And so his job when people come up is we post him up by the door and he sprints out the door as soon as they pull up. Like they aren't even out the car before he's like peeking in the window, like seeing who's here and who he can talk to. And he's the one who gives the tour of the house. He's the one who chats them up. He just loves it, and it's so meaningful because everyone has something to offer. And so think about this. How do we invite people around us to contribute? How do we invite people into that? How do we access and invite everyone's offer to be a part of what's going on? Their gifting, their energy. Now, in homes, it's a little more brass tacks than that. I'm not sure anybody has like the spiritual gift of taking out the garbage. There's things that just need to get done. I get that, and we all learn some discipline in that. But the more we can line that up with who we are, the better. Third thing, quickly, is this. Work is an opportunity for positive impact. In Paul's first letter to these people in Thessalonica, in chapter 4, verse 11, he says this: make it your goal to live a quiet life, minding your own business and working with your hands, just as we instructed you before. But catch why. There's a lot of particular things to Thessalonica in that verse. But in verse 12, check this out. Here's why. He says, then people who are not believers will respect the way you live, and you will not need to depend on others. Work is not just an obligation. It is not just a place to contribute. It's not just a place to bring what we have to offer. It's a place to make a positive impact. We want to work positively because everybody has something to offer, every single one of us. We want to have an impact every single time we work, whether it's in our home, at our vocation, in our church, in our neighborhood, wherever we bring what we have to offer, it's a chance to make an impact and show people what Jesus is like. Jesus is someone who contributed and showed up and made an impact. He brought people back to him. And in the same way, our quality of work, our attitude about work, the way we speak about work, all of those things have a chance to make a positive impact on people around us. And so think about this question. How do we talk about work with those who are watching us? Do we jump into all the complaining that goes on in our workplace? When we leave the house, what do our kids think about work because of what we're saying? Are we leaving begrudgingly with our head hung and just trying to get through it? If that's the case, we shouldn't be that surprised when they hang their head and throw a fit when we ask them to clean their room. We've modeled for them what work means. We really need to think deeply about how do we model this thing. Now, there's a fourth one I didn't put on your outline. This is like on the secret menu. Are you ready? You can write this in for yourself. Not only is contribution the norm, and not only does everybody have something to offer, and not only is work a place for positive impact, it's where money comes from. Work is where money comes from. My kids think it comes from an envelope in the schoolroom. Hey, Dad, I need some money. Just go in there. It's in there. It's in the envelope. Just go get it. Yeah, that's where money comes from. Or, hey, we're at Target. Hey, can we have this? No, we're not going to spend money on that. But, Dad, look, I don't even have any cash. Dad, it's okay. You have those cards. Just swipe the card. That's how it works. It doesn't cost real money. Right? Or better yet, hey, let's just drive through that box where you put your card in and it like spits out money. Can I get one of those, Money doesn't come from magic. It doesn't come from thin air. It can't be spent twice. There's this thing, it comes from work. Somebody's work produces that and affords us the opportunity to do the things that God has called us to do. To give, to save, to spend, to enjoy, to contribute, to be generous, all these different things. We need to model what that looks like. Kind of like this adult volunteer who wanted to help kids go to camp who couldn't go to camp. And so instead of just sending the money in, which is totally fine too, but he just said, you know what? I want them to know that work is where money comes from. And so my backyard's a disaster and my health isn't in a place where I can do that all by myself. So boys, you want to go to camp? Come clean my backyard. Which is awesome. Spend a couple different days, couple different hours at a time coaching them on how to work well and how to contribute. How much more is camp going to mean to them because they contributed? They had something to offer. These are fit high school guys. They can do this when another guy can't. They brought something. They had an offer. They were able to make a positive impact, and now they're able to take that money and spend it on something that is super meaningful. that'll help them connect more with God. It just matters. We need to think well about this. Now, not only should we show and give our kids so here, do this week. Do this. I would encourage you. We always want you to have a conversation. Don't just listen to what people say. Look at what God has said and have a conversation with him. This week, read the scripture on this outline, and there's several others you could read, but also Colossians 3:23. And here's what I would encourage you to do with this. Ask God, and as you look at this, think about and ask God to help you have a godly outlook for work. How does he want you to view work? How does he want you to speak about work? How do you dream for your kids to think about work so they become contributors and not consumers? And ask God for help in that. And then live it out in the week. Instead of complaining about work, be thankful at least for the part where you can provide a living for your family. You may not be able to provide all you want, but you can do this much because God has given you this much. He's given you the ability to work. He's given you this job. There's all kinds of ways we can change our approach to this and model something different for our kids. Now, we talked about this. Show takes a little bit longer. We're all really good at telling. Showing takes a little longer. That's what we've spent our time on today. But very quickly, there does come a time to tell. We can't just show. We also have to tell. Because if people are really going to learn, we've got to speak. Because I think that what we say actually helps people see the why behind what we do. What we say helps people see the why behind what we do. So first we go about modeling what things look like, and we show by our actions. But at some point we do have to tell so that it helps people understand that's why I act this way. Daddy, why do you leave for work every day? Because you got to pay for the electricity. I think you want to eat tomorrow, right? These are the things. God has afforded me an ability to use things that I have to give others, and in return, we get money that allows us to provide for the needs that we have. We get to paint that picture. At some point, we have to tell, but it only provides context for what we've actually done. If we just tell and we don't show, nobody's going to believe it anyway. In fact, Paul does this. He does it in 2 Corinthians 3, verse 10 and 12. In verse 10, he says, while we were with you, we gave you this command. Those unwilling to work will not get to eat. I'm thinking about that for some of my kids. So it's a discipline and a weight loss strategy. No, we have them contribute. They're great. Verse 12. In light of this letter that he's writing now, he says, we command such people and urge them in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, because this is a spiritual issue. We command and urge you to settle down and work to earn their own living. People were being idle, they were being lazy, and that's not what Jesus is like. Christians are contributors. He says, no, I've shown you. You've seen what I was like. I worked day and night. He was a tent maker, provided for his own living. Even though the whole culture, hospitality, said, hey, they're a guest, provide for them. He says, no, I want my message never to look like a sales pitch, so I'll provide for me, and you can just receive what I've brought, and I'll model for you what work looks like. But he did come to the point where he told them. And the same is true for all of us. For the people we want to influence, our kids of any age, our younger siblings, the people we have influence with, there comes a time where our actions need to be explained if we're going to have great, clear influence. And if we're going to say it, it's worth saying well. And so I would encourage you to spend some time doing this. Give some intentional thought to this. Develop a vision for the role of work in your family. How do you want work to be talked about? What kind of work do you want your family to produce? Whether it's cleaning their room, cleaning the pool, putting gas in the car, that's weird. Gas in the car, washing the car, getting a job, contributing part of their finances, whatever it is, what's the vision for work in your family? As you've reflected on how it's been, think forward to how you want it to be. Because people in our family, they need to not only hear about it, they need to see how we deal with this. And then talk to each person in your family about the contribution that they can make. Make a plan for it. No matter what age your kids are, no matter what age the people you influence are, make a plan that there is contribution of some kind from everybody that makes sense for every age. Now, chore chart is a great way to pick a fight in my house, okay? Chore charts are great. Some of you have figured out how to do that, and some people have this strategy and that strategy, and the truth is, among our whole church family, there's tons of people who are great at this. So this week, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a conversation on Instagram and on Facebook that just says, what do you do? And so you can jump in there and say, hey, I've got kids this age and here's what I do and it works. Or here's a link to this thing I read and it totally helped me think about things well in my house. And you can just share with one another. Or you can be like, I have a teenager. How do I get them to clean their room, right? And then the internet will melt because that can't happen. And so whatever it is, let's help one another out. Let's be great at this. Let's think well about how do we have these contributions. Then finally, think about this. Decide on some compensation for various kinds of work within your family. Now, in our house, there are chores you do because I feed you, okay? Like that's just a thing, okay? And you bought this thing, you need to take care of. I'm not going to pay you for that. You accepted that responsibility when you purchased that thing, right? And so there are things that you do that don't earn income, but we also in our family want to create places where people can earn income, because if they don't, they'll never know how to spend income. We don't want money to just magically show up and think it comes from nowhere, and so we have opportunities where they can be compensated for their work. Whether it's their job as a student and their behavior and grades earn them money, and then we talk about giving, saving, spending, or it's additional chores or other things like that. And you got to contextualize this for the age of your kids, but we want that to be a thing for them. We want to be able to compensate them, that they have a means to earn income so they can learn how to deal with that. Right? And so the same thing can happen in every family. It doesn't have to be money. It can be lots of things. But how do we teach our children that the things that we want in life come from effort and trading the things that we have of value, of contributing, of bringing what we have to offer and bringing it with excellence? This whole thing matters, and there's lots of ways to go about it. You can develop great vision and wording for the things that we're going to say, like, we want Team More to do excellent work. We want Team More to do our best. Team More helps. When there's a job going on, we just want to jump in and help. You can develop all kinds of visions like that for your family and speak this thing in, because here's the truth. How our kids view work really matters. Because we want to know how money enters our life, because how money enters our kids' lives matters too. How it enters their lives influences right now, at whatever age they are, how they're going to think about this whole thing. And then for the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about how important it is to think about how money leaves our life. Because we want to give generously, and we want to save consistently, and we want to spend wisely, but all of that is a product of working positively. And so I think this is so important. I hope you realize at the end of all this how important this is and the influence that we have in people's lives. It's worth our effort. It's worth some real conversation between you and God, some real thought and some real reflection, so that we do this thing really well. Because all those things, those dreams that you listed, those are not going to happen on accident. Those will be the product of great thought and great effort and great intentionality as we lean into people around us on one of the most fundamental parts of all of our lives, how money functions in our life. And so stay with us, jump in for the next 3 weeks, and let's think about this well. Let's help our families forward in a really let's watch every family get better. All right? Would you stand and pray with me? I hope you have some great conversations with God this week about all this. And as I was thinking about today, I was reading through both of these letters that Paul wrote, and there's this blessing at the beginning of the second letter. I just want to read over us as our prayer today because it's just perfect. Because God, if you'll sit down and talk to him, he'll prompt you to do great things in your family. He'll show you how to lead your family so well. He'll put great people in your life and maybe on Instagram and Facebook to speak into your lives in helpful things, but you're going to need strength to really follow through on it. Because the truth is, most of us know what to do with money. We just don't do it, right? We're going to need his strength. And so here it is, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 11. And so we keep on praying you, asking our God, praying for you, asking our God to enable you to live a life worthy of his call. And may he give you the power to accomplish all the good things that your faith prompts you to do. Then the name of our Lord Jesus will be honored because of the way you live, and you will be honored along with him. This is all made possible because of the grace of our God and Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. We hope you have some awesome conversations with God. Have an awesome week. Celebrate some baptisms with you, and we'll see you next week.